even as a teenager, I recognized the position, the status of blacks in this country. And so my legacy in Grand Rapids, in Idlewild, where I first started teaching, has always been to uplift my community.
Dr. Mack understood that the kind of gifts that he'd been given, the powers that he'd been given, were not things to talk about, but it was things to do. And he spent his entire life doing.
He was a man that didn't just talk the talk, but he walked the walk. He was a man of action. And so many leaders today are just about talk, and he's one that I hold in high esteem.
He was deeply concerned about the plight of black people. He brought in scholars so that we could recognize the greatness within our people. And that to me is once you begin to know thyself, to know where you've come from, to know your history, this alone will make you more committed and dedicated to the struggle.
Dr. McMillan had a wonderful mentor. His mentor was Mr. Albert E. Mazik. They called him Professor Mazik. Mr. Mazik was principal of Jackson Street Junior High School when Dr. McMillan was growing up. Dr. McMillan was younger than most of the kids in the school, and he was a small fellow. And for some reason, Mr. Mazik realized how bright he was, and he would take him to do errands at his house, and he would talk to Dr. McMillan. And that experience with Dr. McMillan and Mr. Mazik probably led him into the area of education.
Mazik was a powerful man. He was a little short, 5-footer. You could have mistaken him for a white man. Light-skinned as he was, his heart was black on the inside. Mazik had been an activist in the 20s, and he led the fight against the formation of the University of Louisville, because University of Louisville was a private institution at the time, and they tried to float a bond issue, and Mazik organized the blacks in town along with a few others, and they defeated the bond issue to enhance the activities of University of Louisville. So in 1931, as a payoff, the community, the white community offered Mazik and others a university. This was a municipal college. That was the beginning of the municipal college.
Dr. McMillan, Joe, as we affectionately called him, was a teacher. And he taught in all kinds of realms of life. But he also was an advocate, and he was what they old school people used to call a race man. In other words, he was about uplifting his race, and he was absolutely dedicated to that.
When he graduated from college in 1950, you know, they have the practice teaching. He was told that he would never be an educator. He would never be a teacher.
God made me a teacher, you know, and a community committed person.
My greatest memory and the most striking memory of Dr. McMillan is when he had come to our church at St. Stephen Baptist Church, and he spoke on one Sunday morning. And I was struck by the way Dr. McMillan introduced himself. And he proudly referred to himself as a God man. He said, I'm a God man first and foremost.
Amongst the Yoruba, there's a sacred Odu, Irosun. And it talks about standing fiercely like a lion for honor and respect. And for me, that's what Dr. Mack epitomized, you know, one who stood fearlessly for honor and respect. There's also an African saying that if I stand tall, it's because I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors. And Dr. Mack was one who would put us on his shoulders and allow us to see into the future.
I can reflect back several years ago when we had our Reaching Brothers Forum at St. Stephen Church, and we were gathering before all of the African American men who were on that panel were to go down and have a discussion in front of a pretty large audience made up of community members. And as we gathered prior to us coming down to begin that session, I can recall the respect that so many people in the room had for Dr. McMillan. Now, if I'm very honest, not everybody in that room had the same type of respect for one another. I think you had African Americans in there with different political ideologies, religious affiliations, and social agendas. And there may have even been tension in the room around some of those men. But there was never, ever a question of respect and honor for Dr. McMillan.
But Joe was a person that answered the call for education, the call for justice, and he answered it with humility and dignity.
Dr. McMillan was a man who was dedicated, who had a conscience, he was committed, and he had courage. He was a man who was always busy in the community and doing great things, particularly in education and in the social justice system.
From the time that Dr. McMillan moved back to Louisville from Michigan, he became active in so many civil rights and community activities. He's known for organizing the Black Family Conference. He also served as the educational chairman for the Education Committee of the Louisville branch NAACP. He was active in the Justice Resource Center. He was well respected, well admired by his students, colleagues. His mark he made on Louisville.
I worked with Dr. Mack for many, many years, and every time racism raised its ugly head, from Churchill down to the neighborhoods, to City Hall, to the jailhouse, wherever racism showed its ugly face, Dr. Mack was there.
Dr. Mack actually was a living intellectual warrior. He represented what is now a dying breed of those who understand that whatever it is that we've been given is only an instrument and a tool to lift those up behind us.
We have a saying among us, and I'm talking about African warriors, and I remind them about, they quote MacArthur, I believe, when he said, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. But African soldiers and warriors like Dr. McMillan and Marcus Garvey and a lot of others, first of all, we don't get old, we don't fade away, and we don't die.
Dr. McMillan was instrumental in helping to form the National Alliance of Black Superintendents. 35 years ago, there was a handful of superintendents, less than 8 or 9 superintendents, black superintendents in this country. They formed a committee, and they got together and decided that it was very important to get the support amongst their colleagues to form this organization. That organization, the National Alliance of Black School Superintendents, is now the National Alliance of Black School Educators, over 10,000 members strong.
I can remember the time when my good friend and mentor, Dr. Joseph McMillan, first came to the University of Louisville. African American students were in protest because we did not have an official vice presidency office in the administration of the university. And so we were put to the task to make a selection of someone. I was a part of that selection. And Dr. Joseph McMillan, he became that vice president.
Many of the people at the University of Louisville would not have their jobs, would not have their degrees if it wasn't for Dr. Mack, because he fought battles all the time. We had a lady that was trying to get her PhD, and they did everything to keep her from going from getting it. He went in that room, he said, you will give her her PhD.
The story I have to tell about Dr. Mack is how he was a hero to the theater arts department. Some years ago in the 70s, a student by the name of Daryl Goodner, who now lives in California, went to the chair of the theater arts department and said that he and a number of the African American students wanted to put on a program in the Playhouse. And the chair told them no, that they couldn't have it. He didn't want any of that mess on his stage. Well, the students went to Dr. Mack and told him what had happened. And Dr. Mack came down like a fierce wind and spoke to the chair of the theater arts department. And when he was through talking, the students were able to have their program at the theater arts department.
He was always stirring up the pot. He was stirring up the pot in the academy. He was stirring up the pot politically. He was stirring up the pot wherever he went, because he understood that his work was to stir up the pot.
It was never enough. One victory would always have to be followed by another. And his brother Babe, I asked him one time, what keeps him going? And he said his bulldog tenacity. I said, what does that mean, Babe? He said it means the stick-to-itness. Once Joe gets a hold of something, he's never going to let it go.
What I really liked about Dr. McMillan was he really applied his knowledge to the community and beyond the university. He wasn't just a college professor like we think in stereotypes. He really tried to bring the knowledge and the experiences of people at the university to help the community.
He made an emphasis on the very important need for the future teachers to actually interact with the different kind of cultures, the different kinds of race, ethnicities in our community, so that they could be more effective, so that they could have a cultural competence that is a basic element for being a successful teacher.